Yeah, Alan, there's much talk this week about raising the debt ceiling. Can you, I don't know if you've talked about it yet, but if you haven't, can you tell us what importance it is and how it ties in with the debt and the deficit?
Well, to a certain extent, it's an excuse. We've always had a history in this country of having a debt ceiling. There's only a certain amount of debt we're allowed to have. Now, as you're probably aware, every state in the country except one has a balanced budget requirement. And the federal government doesn't. And so we are allowed to go into debt and to not be balanced budget. People are talking about possibly changing that, but for right now, we are not in balance. But we do have a history that says we have to approve the amount of debt that we have. Now, it historically has just been perfunctory. Look, if you pass a budget and you go through with the budget, you know, and the budget is in deficit, well, you have to fund the deficit by borrowing. So your borrowing is going to go up, and you have to pass an increase in the debt ceiling. It's nothing contentious about that. If you've approved the budget deficit, then you should similarly, it would be kind of disingenuous to say, I approve of the deficit, but I'm not going to approve the money that we need to borrow to pay for it. So, but now there's something else going on in this country. Now, for the first time, we're saying that deficit is out of control. And we are not for continuing to have these big budget deficits that are not going to be, that cannot be paid for. So what are we gonna do? The answer is they're thinking of using that debt limit vote as a way to actually force controls. Now, you can't allow the federal government to go into default. I mean, there are different ideas of what would happen if you didn't, because if you didn't pass the debt ceiling, then the federal government couldn't borrow the money that you need to pay all of its bills. So what would happen? Some bills wouldn't get paid. You might have to close down the government because you wouldn't have the money to pay people. If you don't have money to pay people, you can't tell them to come into work. But you have to cut something, and you have to figure out what to cut on an emergency basis, which is never smart. It's never smart to have something done in emergency because you're going to cut things that you don't want to cut, and you're not going to cut things that maybe you should have cut. So what are you going to do? This whole thing is just, this whole concept of not voting for the debt ceiling is just a way to force the Congress to adopt measures that are going to get the deficit under control and that are going to have a budget that is responsible. And so at the end of the day, even the people who are saying they're going to vote against the debt ceiling, they're not saying they're going to vote against it because they don't want the debt to go there. They're saying they're going to vote against it unless we have a real rigorous effort at getting the deficit under control and getting the debt under control. So to a certain extent, it is just a game because everybody knows that you do have to increase it, but it is a very effective game at bringing people's attention to the fact that this deficit is rising way too fast, and we have to get it under control. So again, it's a game, but I think it's a game that can get a lot of people's attention, and I think it actually, the threat of it could work. What I'm hoping is the threat of it is going to force very stringent budget cuts, and then everybody will vote for the debt ceiling increase, and then it's going to watch like hell, and maybe have more recurring debt ceiling increases, so we keep people's feet to the fire. Yeah.
Can you clarify something about the three areas of the budget: discretionary spending, Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare? That's the entire budget.
Well,
falls into one of those three categories.
Well, I mean, you also have interest on the debt. but interest on the debt is just a function of the other three. So there's no discretion. Defense is actually, and some people want to look at defense as maybe something different, but defense is, when you get down to it, discretionary spending. So if you think about it, pretty much everything that can be done is going to fit in one of those three categories.
Why is Social Security and Medicaid, Medicare not considered?
Well, it's
Repeat the question.
okay. The question is, why is Social Security and Medicaid, Medicare not considered discretionary? I mean, to a certain extent, it is discretionary. The reason it's considered not discretionary is because right now there are laws on the books mandating how that it is to be paid in the form that it is paid to be paid. So you would have to actually change the law in order to cut or increase the level of expenditures. Yeah.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, but remember back in '86, what happened was the South and the West in this part of the country should spend more on sales taxes to fund their operations and not income taxes like the Northeast. I don't think that's going to happen again, and I think since then, you now have a choice whether to take a state and local income tax deduction or a sales tax deduction. I think it's going to be very difficult to eliminate state and local income taxes as a deductible. That's a federalism question. And you get a lot of states now that are very high. I mean, it's not only the Northeast. California is 9 or 11. Delaware is 9 or 11. Illinois is 525. Massachusetts, Connecticut are 5. We're at 925 on that sunset provision, which will probably be extended in the next year or two. And then mortgage interest deduction, I mean, that's like changing the rules of the game after the game starts. You know, I think the only way you're going to get that through is on new mortgages. And that's going to, I don't think, well, as long as the housing market's the way it is now, there's no way that it's going to happen in the next few years until the housing market rebalances, if you will.
Well, I mean, there are people who say that very thing. It is going to be the will of the people and the will of the people who are in Congress. Those deductions for state and local taxes, even though they are there, what's not understood is that I would be willing to bet that the vast majority of people sitting in this room do not get a deduction for state and local taxes. And that's because you're in the alternative minimum tax. You just think you do. It is deductible, but it's not reducing your tax. So already it's been that the benefit of that deduction is being eaten away because of the complexity of the tax code. I agree with you on the mortgage interest. They're talking about phasing it out. I don't like phase outs generally because it adds a lot of complexity to the code, but that is the only way to do it in a relatively fair basis. But if you think about it, there is no rational reason that our tax code should give you a deduction for mortgage interest, for state and local taxes, or for that matter, for charitable contributions. They are public policy reasons. I'm not saying they're bad. I'm just saying that those are issues of public policy. What it should be, you should say, as it was years ago, you should make a charitable contribution because you're charitable, not because you're getting a tax deduction for it. And how much money you pay for how, just think about it for a second. I asked somebody once, how much was the house you just bought? Figuring he's going to tell me 500,000, 400, $1 million. He said, oh, it cost me $100,000 plus $6,000 a month. Because in his mind, that's how much it cost. Well, that's not how much it cost. That's how much his payments are going to have to be to cover it. But what that means is how much of a tax deduction he gets and how much his interest rate is determines how much he can pay for the house. If he could pay more for the house, he'd pay more for the same house if he could get a tax deduction for it. So what am I saying? What I'm saying is that these tax characteristics are actually increasing the prices of real estate. The amount you pay for a home is higher than what it would be if nobody got a deduction for mortgage interest. So what this is doing, this is propping up the value of real estate, making it higher than what the market says it really should be. Now, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, it was implemented as an incentive. They said it's a good thing to have people own their own homes.
Well, there's already limits. $1 million in mortgage, you can't deduct interest on it. In the HELOCs, it's 100,000.
Well, that's right, there are limits, but who's to say zero shouldn't be the appropriate limit? So what you're really saying is, well, for a $5 million house or for a $50 million house, it's not going to have much effect because you can't get a mortgage interest deduction. But for a $700,000 or $800,000 house, it's going to affect the price of that house. The bottom line is, we need to decide, as a practical matter, whether do we want to prop up the value of real estate? Do we want to incentivize people to give more money to charity? Do we want to incentivize states to be able to charge higher taxes on their constituents because their constituents think, well, I'm getting a tax deduction for it anyway? The same with real estate taxes. Would real estate taxes ever have been allowed to get as high as they were today if people like us didn't say, well, our real estate taxes are going up, but at least we can take a deduction on our tax return? It's enabled them to charge us more taxes than we otherwise would have been willing to put up with, and it's not a good thing. Getting deductions for these things is not, I would much rather not have the deductions. I'll decide what I want to spend my money on and just give me a lower tax rate. That's what I think is.
Many municipal unions that dictate to local governments don't have the guts to say no, whether it's school boards or city councils or whatever it is.
That's a question.
15 years.
Though I totally agree, it's a question for another day. It's almost another topic we should have possibly for another meeting. But it is a significant cause of the problems we're having. Yeah.
There's another thing. Is there anybody in Washington seriously saying that is not a problem? What is the classic Democrat position? Is there an actual position that's against lowering the debt and lowering the burden on future generations? What does it sound like?
Well, the Democrat position is it's not going to be as serious a problem because when the economy turns around, there'll be plenty of money to pay for it all. It's mathematically incorrect, but they are very short-sighted. The biggest difference, in my opinion, between Republicans and Democrats today is Democrats only care about the next year or two, the next election, and the Republicans are trying to put in place policies that will work for our children and grandchildren. And it's much more difficult to defend those things because it's much less immediate. People would rather have an extra dollar in their pocket tomorrow than, just know that they'll take care of their children and grandchildren later. It's not going to happen. We've already devastated our children and grandchildren with this huge debt.
Alan, move over.
Okay, as I said, one final question.
Yeah, I'd like to make a suggestion for another meeting, if you're the guy to do it. Because the one thing that I've been listening to in all of these conversations is we never talk about the gorilla in the ballpark. And that is the unfunded infrastructure maintenance costs for which there's no amortization and only one institution has even an idea what the number looks like. And when you hear that number, the trillions we owe to ourselves for the borrowings is chicken feed. Because we don't even have, in some cases, the people to design the work. That's where we've gotten to. So if you want to come back with that one, I'd like to see this group swallow that bunch.
It's actually just a further expansion of the same issue. We've taken our eye off the ball. We've spent money on things that got people elected, but we haven't taken care of the important long-term things, the long-term best interest. And that is true, and it does sound, it's certainly a topic. It actually goes hand in hand with the public service union problem. It's all part of the same problem. Anyway, thank you all very much.